We just heard from Scott Miner, the head of Guggenheim, who said this is the worst event of his career. Why are you so optimistic?
Yeah, and look, and I'd say, take a step back. It's a major tragedy, the outbreak. But our view, and it's really been our view, especially over the last 10 years being bullish on tech, is that the exogenous events we have to look at and say, does this impact the demand longer term? And does this change the dynamic for our winners? And fundamentally, when I look at names like Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and some of the FAANG names, even though this is going to be a very uncertain period and a lot of hand-holding, when we're on the other side of that, in my opinion, this continues to be stocks we want to be owning, even though you have to obviously factor in risk in the near term.
Facebook just canceled a conference that's 3 months away. You've got Microsoft pulling out of conferences. You've got Apple, Microsoft, HP cutting their forecast for the quarter. What do you think then the impact is going to be in the near term if in the long term you're positive?
Sure, I think Microsoft's a good example. So let's talk about the warning yesterday. Look at PCs, a third of revenue. Obviously have to take that off the table. But yet, the 2/3, the cloud, Azure, a key part of the transformation of Microsoft, that continues to be something that they kept on the table. And I'd say fundamentally 70 to 80% of the valuation is because of that. So when I look at a name like Microsoft, that's an example. Like they are definitely obviously going to be a victim of the supply chain, no different than Apple and any other PC player. But when I look out, I'm not talking the next few weeks, but when I look at Microsoft, 9, 12, 18 months, is this a name that I believe continues to be the best cloud play over what I think is just a transformational growth trend? And that's why I continue to view this as uncertain and obviously scary headlines. You look at your winners, you look at the names that you, in my opinion, that list, and you selectively continue to buy them, during this just massive volatility.
Yes, Dan, you're not alone in that view. A number of analysts, despite what's going on, still rate Microsoft a buy, but it has slipped 11% this week. So I guess the question is, when do you buy? Do you wait for longer, or how selective do you need to be here?
Yeah, I can tell you, clients on the phone all day. Our sort of view is, you sort of do scenario analysis for the Apples, for the Amazon, for the Microsoft, and you pick your spots and you're selective. But you are continuing to sort of own these names and buy at these levels if you believe in the fundamentals, which we do. So this is one, from our opinion, it's not the time to go into the bunker. It's a time to basically look at your whiteboard, look at the names you wanted to own over the last 4 or 5 months, but the valuations ran ahead of you. Because when I look at a lot of these stocks, you have in 5 days, 6 to 7 months of games wiped out. So it depends which side you're on. Just like, there's obviously going to be the bears and obviously more the Armageddons. They're not going to be buying high growth. But in my opinion, this is more of a pause in still the long-term bull market for tech rather than the start of a darker period. That's at least our view.
In the short term, however, I'm wondering if the risks around the supply chain are fully understood.
That's a great point. And I think that's where when Apple was the first one to fess up, and of course then Microsoft, I think it just that's something where the streets tried to get their arms around. But fundamentally, it's such an unprecedented situation where now the supply chain, to your point, it's do we start seeing normalization in March, April, May? And I think that's how you have to put the goalpost, because if we start seeing some normalization starting in March, then 5G super cycle remains. You'll have the 5G phones come out for Apple in September. And I think, but if you start to get into April, May, and later, that's where the supply chain, the impacts are going to be much more pervasive. And obviously you're seeing a lot more of that reflected in these stocks as we continue to go through this volatile situation.
What about a company like Tesla, which obviously has a production foothold in China and depends on the Chinese market for demand for electric cars, which has already been waning? It's not just about buying a phone. This is a huge purchase after the country has been through, or is going through a dramatic kind of reckoning.
Well, that's why when you look at Apple and Tesla in particular, so much of the growth, especially for Tesla, is China. If you look at Giga 3 in Shanghai and just really the Chinese market, that's really a big part of the growth thesis and the bull thesis. I think for Tesla, it comes down, is this a 3 to 4 month delay? Or does this change the next 2, 3 years of EV inflection in China?
Does it?
Now, to me, I believe it's more of a pause and a delay than changing the long-term demand thesis for Tesla in China. That's why, and even though Tesla's obviously, been, just a wild stock, I continue to view that as a name where the China thesis remains, even though in the near term, this has obviously been a gut punch fundamentally to any company that plays into China.
Do you expect that any of these companies will fundamentally change the location of their supply chains? I mean, it's something they've probably already been thinking about given the US-China trade tensions. We've seen reports about Microsoft and Google looking at Vietnam and Thailand, but obviously that would be a huge lift for any company that's got a deep and long supply chain in China, like Apple. But could we see that happen?
It would take 2 to 3 years to remove 10% of that supply chain to other countries. And that's why it's one, as much as you could definitely in Vietnam and other areas in India, and that you could definitely see production move. When you look at Apple, they've said that's the hearts and lungs of Cupertino is in Foxconn across the supply chain. So you'll see around the edges some changes, but even as we went through the US-China trade war over the last year, there was a lot of talk, little action. And I think here, no doubt, strategically, you're going to see definitely more diversification. But the reality is the vast majority of the supply chain, it's ingrained in China and the region.